Bosses of Reddit, what's the craziest thing you've seen an employee do? I was doing a weekly call monitor on one of my better employees and found he was doing an Indian accent. I was a bit surprised, so I went back and listened to 5+ calls of his from that week and found he was doing different impressions for almost every call. Arnold Schwarzenegger, Mickey Mouse, Apu from The Simpsons, a pretty solid Christopher Walken, and a few others. When I was a kid working at a grocery store, another cashier would often buy and then chug a half gallon of milk to get sick to go home. Job was horrid, so it was entertaining at the time. Guy that worked for me was getting out of his car one morning and saw one of the other managers in the company, so started talking to him. In the middle of the conversation he whipped his deck out and started peeing on the side of his car. He was 37 years old, sober, and it was 8 in the morning. This was for a corporate job. I manage a small weld shop. Generally, I don't care about less than clean background checks or pot, as long as you come into work every day and get sheet done. Finding reliable welders is difficult, so a lot of sheet flies. This sometimes leads to weird employees. This one guy we hired stopped showing up. After like 3 days, he walks in the door. He's bright red from being sunburnt to sheet, and his clothes are torn to shreds. Dude was drinking on a little aluminum boat and somehow got lost at sea. He looked like Tom Hanks from Castaway. He didn't have cell phone reception, so he wasn't able to call me. He did take a bunch of pictures over the few days he was lost at sea, though, including one where he was being rescued by the Coast Guard. I gave him the rest of the week off. Coast Guard took him to the hospital. He checked himself out and immediately came into work. Didn't even go home and shower. Odd dude. Had a see-through water bottle that was filled with vodka. He started the day off fine, but was legless by lunch. Drove him home, 40 minutes each way, because he couldn't afford a cab. Talked the owner out of firing him, and instead we helped him get into a program. That was 4 years ago. He's the production manager now. Model employee now, in fact. I was a valet captain at an expensive restaurant with the parking lot 2 blocks away, and one of the valets I was supervising took a wrong turn in a customer's 2016 47 rupees and ended up getting pulled over and arrested for going 110 in a 70 on the interstate. Used to work with this girl that would watch pronoun as she was operating her machine. She'd prop her phone up on the control board and just watch, as if it was a sitcom or some sheet. Co-workers went to her supervisor to let him know, and he had to have a sit down with her. She was oblivious to the fact that watching shows on your phone while you work was prohibited, let alone Pornhub. That sounds really dangerous, but also kinda funny. On a related note, my future in-laws invited my so to dinner at their new house last week. When he got there, his mom's husband was watching pronoun on the big TV, was joined by so's mom, and they continued to watch this boob fest for the plot while they all ate dinner together. So asked them what the duck, they didn't see the problem, and that was that. He surmises Game of Thrones gave them the idea that it was acceptable to watch straight up pronoun because it has a story too. Apostrophe. I had an employee call a French woman a frog and then start rebiting. That was kinda awkward. Back when I was a gas station clerk, my manager would deal drugs while on the clock. He'd take people into the back office to talk to. We all knew what he was doing, mostly because he all but admitted it. And because we all knew, someone eventually said something, and then the company tried to make him take a drug test. He just quit instead. Never saw who did it, but someone curled out a meatloaf-sized turd into an office plant pot one evening. It must have happened straight after work, because the cleaners arrived around 6:30 p.m. and refused to touch it. Over 10 years ago now, and office folklore, never found out who did it. A guy went for his lunch break and came back drunk. We were delivery drivers. One time there was this guy who was a temp at this small 30-man proto shop in Livonia. He always wanted to be hired in full time. One day, he hatched a plan. He came in very early one morning and put up motivational signs all over the building. He made them himself out of cardboard and markers, the kind of thing you'd expect to see "will work for food" written on. The posters said things like, "If you're not giving 100% today, go home and I'll get someone who will," and "What did you do to earn your check today?" He signed them all with the owner's name. Well, we hired him. It was hilarious. But as soon as he was full-time, he started shirking and demanding raises. I guess he assumed he could join the UAW and get all kinds of benefits after he was hired. But we were just a small shop and didn't even have health insurance. He was fired about a week later, and we were still finding hidden motivational posters for a month. Not too crazy, but pretty stupid. I had a girl that worked for me at a mortgage company pull the credit report of her ex-boyfriend's new girlfriend. No idea how she got her social security number, and then went on the girl's Facebook page posting messages about all of her debt and past due accounts and the crappy kinds of car that she drives, etc. Got an angry call from the girl who ended up being a pain in my butt for a while. Edit. Forgot an interesting part. We fired the girl, and about a week later an agent from the Department of Treasury comes in asking questions about the girl. Turns out, she was being investigated for a series of fraudulent things, including operating as a loan officer without a license and taking out a bunch of federal student loans in her grandfather's name. He wanted information because in investigating, learned that she had been fired from the company for some sort of malfeasance, and he wanted the details. She went to jail for a while eventually. Not too crazy, but pretty stupid. I dunno. She sounds pretty ducking crazy to me. I had an employee call and tell me her mother died. Well, I got an anonymous phone call from someone telling me she was lying, so I called the number one had on file to send my regards, and I get an address to send flowers. In the meantime, the office had collected an envelope of money to help with the costs of the funeral and missing work. When I called, the mother answered and was shocked to find out her daughter used her death as an excuse to go to Vegas for the weekend. When she returned, I held a big meeting with everyone in the office and presented her with the envelope of money and flowers. She took it and faked cried. I called her into my office to reveal that I knew and fired her and took the envelope back. She said she don't give a duck and left. A girl in a non-clinical pediatric hospital job. She was like 19 over 20 and kind of weird. Apparently she had a crush on me, but I brushed it off because she was weird and obviously that was unprofessional. I knew she came from a relatively messed up home, but she was fairly normal outside of being goofy and awkward. One day she got caught giving a patient a blowjob in his room, and my first thought was, oh my god, this is a pediatric hospital. But luckily for her, the patient was 18. There are some kids with congenital disorders who see specialists all their life and aren't just suddenly dropped on their 18th birthday. They sort of slowly transition, and he was one of them. That was unfortunately the beginning of the end for her, as life became a train wreck afterward. She soon got knocked up by someone else, gained like 100 to 150 pounds, and had a severely autistic child. She is constantly posting on Facebook, and it's the saddest shit ever. Like, anyone want to have a play date with and die? 0 comments or likes. Then randomly she'll just have massive breakdowns about how hard it is to have a severely autistic child who can barely walk. Her kid is 4 to 5, and how she has no friends or anything. It's horribly sad. I have so many stories about this dude. Me and my former boss interviewed him for a position in it, and I got a really weird vibe, but my boss was really impressed by his CV. Lots of stuff like Cisco certification course teacher, and I was about to quit, so I didn't really put up a fight about it, and he was hired. Day 2. He brought in a 3 feet long RC helicopter and put it in his office. Day 3. He was told to order a laptop for himself. Part of the job was ordering its stuff, and bought the most expensive computer he could find. Him talking titanium and a $10K price tag. Day 4. He ordered a office chair in leather with built-in massage stuff. Day 5. Big argument with my boss, and he was told he couldn't do anything without me approving it first. Day 8. He told me he wanted to apply for public IPs for every single piece of equipment at all the company offices. Several thousand IPs, because Nat sucked. Turns out he didn't know what it was. Cisco teacher remember. Day 9. He changed the domain admin password to a password some dudes at a Reich channel had told him was the most secure password in the world. Around day 15, he told me he needed time off course his girlfriend had left him for his AC heli instructor, and he was scared she would take stuff from their apartment. There is so much more. He was fired a few weeks after I left. Last I heard he was selling VPN services to people using his own home broadband connection. As a sergeant in the army, my unit was out on a 2-week field exercise. One of my soldiers decided to drink a dozen boxes of shelf-stable whole milk. He gets sick and has to go back to the rear. We find out later that he is quite lactose intolerant and knew it for years before going to the field. He bragged to some of his buddies about the scam, and one of the other NCOs heard him. That started the investigation that got him demoted for malingering. In the Navy we had a broken accommodation ladder. It's a stairway attached to the ship for embarkation and debarkation that isn't always used. If there is a brow on the pier, it was due for inspection, and rather than fail the inspection the guys just unbolted it and let it fall overboard. Typical. Lol. My army unit was loading a fast sealift ship with our vehicles for an overseas deployment. At the port, the transportation specialists were telling us where to stage and where to load. They had us back our own equipment onto the ship. One vehicle was about to strike the side of the ship and all the transport guys immediately turned to face the opposite direction. Since I noticed their behavior to be odd, I asked one of them why they did it. He replied, "If we witness an accident, we have to do paperwork." Had an employee that was always falling asleep while riding around from job to job. It was time for him to get his 450 for the company and had to travel about 2 hours away for testing. Halfway into his trip we checked where he was, and the truck had been running for an hour about 45 minutes from the test site at a truck stop. Had to call a gas station at and go wake him up. Still hadn't contacted me. About 30 minutes later we get a call from a guy that he had run off the road. The company name and number is on the side of the truck. We checked the GPS and it showed him driving 70 miles per hour down to 20 miles per hour right around the time the incident happened. He ended up passing his test and making it back to the shop. I asked him what the duck is he on? Heroin? He said, "No, I was smoking meth all night." Honesty isn't always the best policy. We had a guy that would vanish in the middle of the day for roughly 3 to 4 hours, then return at the end of the day. Come to find out he would go home during that time, play with his dogs, smoke weed and then come back to work. When we had to sit him down and explain he couldn't just leave, he totally flipped out and told us all to go F ourselves and to fire him. He got a warning and still works here, and ours still does nothing when he disappears. Saw a dude fall asleep on a stand-up forklift. How tired must you be to do that? This guy always tried to hide at work to avoid working. One day I was looking for him, and I stepped into the bathroom. I notice a shoe print on the back of the toilet, and I look up, and one of the ceiling tiles is pushed a little to the side. I climb up there, and this mother ducker is hiding in the ceiling.